So I want to talk today a little bit about an idea. We'll call it dropping your experience. So this, you might think of this in some ways like letting go, and you'll hear that often in spiritual circles, where we're practicing letting go. You might hear that in your emotional life if you have something you're hanging on to, someone you need to forgive, some pain you haven't healed from, that you are in a process of letting go. What I'm talking about today is it could be related to that, but it's slightly different, or it's more specific and more technical, and it's a little bit more about meditation. But once you see how it works in meditation, you can apply it in your everyday life. So when an experience arises, a very subtle thing happens that most of us don't notice until we've meditated, and many of us don't even notice at first when we're meditating. Experience arises, all the sensations arise, the sounds, the pictures, the feelings in the body, and we then sort of pick out some part of those experiences to focus in on. By pick out, it's obviously unconscious and involuntary for the most part, maybe entirely, but at least you can acknowledge that most of the time you're walking through the day, what catches your attention is not your choice. Something catches your attention, right? It feels like that. And then we focus in on it. It's like we grab that part of our experience. As we're talking to me now, you could be grabbing, you're trying to understand me, maybe. And so you're grabbing this experience. Sometimes we'll talk about it like the experience is grabbing you, but you might also have this experience of grabbing the experience. That is trying to hold on to my words and ideas, and then trying to hold on to whatever story or philosophy that's being generated in your mind, which is another kind of experience. Now, maybe as you're listening to me, you're getting distracted by something, and that's grabbing you. But again, the fact that you're not dropping it right away means that there is something over there that you're also grabbing onto. So say you're being distracted by your dog playing with a toy. So you get distracted by the dog playing with a toy, and then you actually subtly grab onto that experience to get immersed in, because there's some part of you that wants to experience the dog playing with the toy because it's cute, or because it's going to break the vase or whatever. For whatever reason, you get involved in the story of it. So when I talk about dropping, what I mean is allowing an experience to happen without you holding on to it. And I just want to talk about this because we've been talking about concentration for a while, but dropping is the flip side of concentration. It's a required part of the meditative practice. When we concentrate, we sort of think of concentration as grabbing really hard onto something and being able to hold on to it. And that's an okay way to think about it at first. It actually is not what we're ultimately trying to do, but it's maybe what we have to do at first to get an experience of a stiller mind and a stiller attention. But the flip side of that grabbing is a dropping. And that means to allow the experience to progress without you trying to control it or hold on to it. At first, these two might seem like opposites, but you can concentrate on a very specific thing and drop it at the same time. You can do those things. But first, let's just pretend they're separate. And let's talk about what dropping an experience is like. It's a very useful skill to have. Once you notice it, it really changes your experience of every day. Once you notice that you're not dropping things, it really changes your experience of everyday life. We don't ever really drop things unless we're practicing it. What we do is we grab onto one thing and ride that thing until something else grabs us, and then we grab onto that thing and ride that thing. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's almost like we feel like we're in an ocean or a river, and we're sort of swimming quickly from log to log to stay afloat, rather than just floating down the river. So once you know what it's like to drop an experience, well, it's something that you can apply all day long. So the simplest way to teach this is to get a full set of labels, kind of mindfulness labels, that'll apply to anything that comes up, and you just label the thing and then you let it go and you will see what's next. So it might be something like this. You're just, oh, I see my face on the screen. Oh, I hear some silence. I feel my butt on the seat. That seems like normal mindfulness, but we're just adding a little flavor to that. I see my face on the screen and I immediately drop it. I don't hold on to it. That means it's allowed to do whatever it wants. I'm not going to figure anything out about it. I'm not going to investigate it. I'm just going to let it go and see what comes up next. Oh, what came up next was the sound of silence in my room, or the ambient sound. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to drop it. Not have to hold on to it, not have to figure it out, not have to even, do anything at first beyond label it. And eventually we don't even label it, right? We'll just let it go without even labeling. We let that go, we drop it, and then my butt on the seat arises. And we can drop that as well. So the best way to practice this is with things that you're not very attached to, so that you can know what the experience of dropping is like. So you can sort of look over to your left or your right and see some object, and now just let it be. One way of saying this, and some of you have heard me say this before, one way of doing this is saying in your mind, I'm okay with not having this experience, right? So I'm looking over and I'm seeing this tree. And if I no longer can experience the tree, I'm okay with that. So we're letting go of holding on to it. I'm fine if I no longer experience the tree or have this particular experience of the tree. Not trying to make it go away. Dropping it does not mean in any way rejecting it. It's a practice of not grasping. If your mind immediately wants to go to the difficult things in your life, the challenges in your life, then dropping it will seem very, very hard. But just like lifting weights or learning any activity, you start with simple, easy things first. And so we try to just drop everyday experiences without getting involved in them. Another way of putting dropping is to say we are allowing it to be as it is, entirely allowing it to be as it is, which we've said many times, but we think of that as a term, a kind of acceptance term, right? We're going to allow it to be as it is. That's a way of accepting it. And that's true, but acceptance has this slight flavor of, bringing it into your life and letting it sit down on a chair next to you, which is very nice. That's a very nice way of thinking about accepting things. But actual things don't actually want to come in and sit in your chair. They want to move on. They want to flow into what's next. So actual things are more like the wind or a river. And so if we want to accept with that awareness, that awareness of the impermanence of things, then we need to add this dropping element into it and say, okay, I'm watching this thing, but I don't need it to be the way it is. right? It can change into whatever it wants to. I'm okay with it being the way it is, but I'm also okay with it not being the way it is. Every time we try to figure something out, we start living in the past. We see something and we're like, I want to figure that out. Now we're trying to figure out the thing we saw in the past, even if it was a few moments ago. So as I'm talking, as I'm giving this little talk, you can be dropping my voice. You can let it arise and not have to grab onto it. Right? It arises in your awareness. That's out of your control. I mean, you could, of course, turn the sound off, but as long as it's within your hearing range, it's going to arise in your awareness. But let it just flow. So you're dropping things all day long. It's just they're never at the center of your attention, or very rarely for most people, they're not at the center of your attention. Right now, I walk through my room and I just drop the walls and I drop the couches and I drop the rug and I probably drop the sound of wind outside. I drop the feeling of my clothes on my skin. There's a whole bunch of things that I'm just constantly dropping because they're not of interest to me. So I'm not grabbing onto them. What we want to be able to learn is to have the experience of dropping with the thing that's at the center of our attention, as well as the things that are on the periphery of our attention. So this is a good way of thinking about it. We're sitting here and there's all these things in your attention that you're just dropping all the time. You're not holding on to them. You're not interested. You're not trying to capture it or think about it or figure it out or fix it or improve it or judge it. You're just letting them go. And then there's whatever is at the center of your attention, that same attitude, that same lightness with which you're holding all the other stuff around you. You can hold on the things that are at the center of your attention. Just letting it flow by. It doesn't even have to register in memory, really. That's probably that's one of the last things to go, is that we feel like, hey, I'm doing an activity. I want to remember what's happening. And just let my words go through, have their effect, and you don't have to try and store them in memory. If they need to be stored in memory, they will be. You don't have to try. So when we start meditating, it's probably best to just focus on concentration and see how often you can bring your mind back to the object. But as you get a little more concentrated and a little more experienced, you want to start to loosen the way you're concentrating. And today we're talking about that by adding in this concept of dropping it. So you may be focused on your breath, but at the same time, you're dropping the breath. So the thing you're focused on, you are dropping. The thing you're focused on, you are totally allowing. The thing you're focused on, you're totally allowing it to be the way it is, but you're also allowing it to not be the way it is. That is, to change into whatever it wants to. I'm okay with this exactly the way it is. And I'm okay with this not being here at all. And that adds a lightness to your concentration technique. But it adds a lightness to your life as well, if you can start practicing it. Just see how many minutes a day can you go through whatever you're doing or not doing. Sitting in silence is going to be the easiest way, or not doing, and drop what's arising. Well, what happens there is you'll start to notice the habit to get involved, to immerse yourself, to start telling stories about, to see yourself as the hero in a drama, even when you're washing the dishes, right? So say you're going to wash the dishes, something you've done 100 times, or wash yourself in the shower, or cook a meal. There's a little bit of drama there, which is like, I have to get this done. There could be a little more drama, like, I hate this chore, or this takes forever. Or more drama, it could be, I really love this. That's fine too. What would it be to do the activity without adding that gripping sensation, allowing a dropping sensation instead? So how would that work? Well, you're starting to wash the dishes and you're dropping the experiences as they're rising. That means you're allowing a flow of sensory experience. You're allowing a flow of what you're seeing. It's changing constantly. The water's flowing, the plates are moving, your hands are moving. A flow of feel in your hands. Oh, it's hot 1 second, it's cold 1 second, it's wet 1 second, it's dry the next. There'll be sounds, obviously. But then you might also notice the mind starting to do the drama. Like, I have to get this done. Boy, why do people not wash their dishes? Oh, I have to rewash this because what's his name didn't wash it right, whatever it is, right? And you start dropping that as well. Dropping does not mean pushing away. It means allowing it to flow through. It means not grabbing onto and going for the ride. Does that make sense? There's other ways to get at this that we've talked about in the past. One of them is focusing on impermanence itself. And then you really start to have to just accept that things are being dropped on their own. Another way is to not focus on anything and just drop whatever arises. So a kind of open awareness that allows your attention to float between things, but anything that comes along, you don't get sucked into it, you just drop it. In that sense, the concentration type of concentration changes. It's no longer focused on one thing, it's just open wide. And that is much more like what you would do in your everyday life if you wanted to practice dropping things. Now, the benefit of this is as you go through your day, what normally happens to us is drama number one happens in the day, and we get attached to it and get involved in it. And it leaves traces in our body, and we don't drop it, right? We've grabbed on and we've sort of clenched a little bit. Okay, so then we proceed to drama number two. We're already a little clenched, right? And it comes along and we grab onto it. And it requires, again, a little bit more attentional muscle to grab onto the next drama of the day. And we do this all through the day, and these things leave more and more traces in our body and in our experience and in our emotions. And we do that one day, and then day after, the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And this forms our personality, it forms our neuroses, it forms our emotional structure. And it traps us, really. It becomes the prison that we live in. We live in this condition, this structure, in Buddhism, they call it conditioned structure, the structure that's built up of the things you've grabbed onto with your attention in your life. So when we practice dropping it, we are practicing letting things just move through. Lightening the burden on our system, on our emotional system, on our nervous system. And again, at first, if the dramas all seem really serious and extreme, it's just going to be very hard to practice that. So you want to practice it in moments when they're not so serious. But over time, you start to drop things even in the most intense experiences. Even though it's scary, you don't have to hold on to it. Even though it's scary, you don't have to figure it out. You can let it flow into what's next, and you can let yourself flow into what behavior is next. Now, as you do this, as you start to practice everyday dropping, you're creating space for the things you've embedded in your nervous system in the past to start arising. Right? So it's sort of almost like the body goes, okay, we're no longer taking on any stuff each day, or we're taking very little on. So now there's some time and space for us to experience this thing that we never really let go of, right? That we've been holding and carrying. Now we can look at that, and now we can, so then emotional things from the past or habits or conditional patterns start to arise into consciousness, into attention. They were always there, but they arise into our attention. And now we can practice dropping with those things that we didn't drop yesterday or a week ago or 10 years ago or 30 years ago. And this way we sort of slowly purify our system without trying to purify it, right? We're not saying, I need to focus on this and purify it. That doesn't work. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is whatever arises in attention, we let it do what it's going to do. We stop holding on to it. And at first, that might not look like purification at all. It just might be very, very uncomfortable. In fact, discomfort that's accepted and felt is often what's described as purification in the spiritual path. Pain is not purifying on its own, but if it's fully accepted and allowed and dropped, then that starts to purify your system. And I don't mean this in a medical way, although maybe it has some effect that way. We're talking about old knots of emotion, old knots of personality, old things we're still holding on to. They start to get purified and loosened and released. Nothing I'm describing is any different ultimately than what we practice in the mindfulness part of our meditations. But the way it's described, it can lean a little too much to the concentration and grabbing part, to the accepting the way things are right now, as opposed to also accepting that they're changing and going away, accepting that it's okay that they not be here. And we've talked about this before, but it can be very surprising to find out that it's hard for you to say it's okay for certain things to not be here. You might think it's obvious with certain pleasures. It's a pleasure. It doesn't feel okay for that to go away. I want that pleasure to stay here. I want that comfort to stay here. So that seems obvious, but we also do it with our pains or our suffering or our fear. You can think about it now. Like, what's your number one fear right now? What's your number one challenge? And can you say to yourself, it would be okay to not have that experience? Be okay for that experience to just go away. If you can, that's great. That might really help, honestly, over time. But if you pay attention, most of us, especially if it's a challenge we've been having for a while, most of us are not ready to let go of those experiences. Now be careful here. So for instance, you might be like, hey, I just got a huge fine for whatever, how I painted my house, okay? And you go, I would be fine with that not being here, right? I'd be fine with that fine not being here. But that's not what I'm saying. Would you be fine with your emotional reaction to the fine not being here? Right? That's what we're really dropping. In this moment, you're feeling anxiety or pressure or pain or fear or anger about the fine. And then you ask yourself, is it okay to not have this pressure or anxiety or anger? And most of us will actually have a lot of resistance to dropping those emotional responses. That's why they're arising. And we have to be really careful here. We're not saying the anger or fear or any of those things are bad, and we're not saying to make them go away. The technical term dropping means to not hold on to them. If they want to go away, they should be allowed to. Right? Or if they want to change and get more intense, they should be allowed to. Ultimately, that's what dropping really means. This fear I'm having now, I'm okay with it not being the way it is right now. I'm okay with that. Meaning it could go away completely or it could get worse. Worse. Okay. So we're going to meditate now. We can practice that a little bit.